Okay, so here we are at Stiminosuccus Museum with a special exhibit of Permian Monsters, Life Before the Dinosaurs. It's pretty much a self-explanatory description there. We're going to tell you what life was like before the Triassic period, and all the interesting animals that came here. There were reptiles and amphibians, and some of the stuff you're familiar with, others you probably may not be unless you study exclusively in this. Let's take a look. So this right here, this plaque tells us about very brief introduction of the Permian. It was a time before the dinosaurs. It began nearly 300 million years ago, about 50 million years before the age of dinosaurs, which is Triassic. But here we won't find any dinosaurs. We find dinosaur ancestors and different types of amphibians, even some that are no longer around, certain groups of that. It ended, as you can see down here, with the largest mass extinction known, even worse than Cretaceous tertiary one that killed off the dinosaurs. So, but you may not find this plaque much interesting. Let's keep a further look on it. Okay, so this plaque right here tells all the contributors of this exhibit, all the paleontologists, sculptors, and stuff like that. But the part that I definitely recognized was the consulting artist Julius Satoni. I did a couple books with his art in it, one specifically on his art. And what have you. So, and that's all who helped contribute to all this. So for those who are interested, there you go. This plaque right here talks about the creatures as the Panthalassa. Now, this is the Permian is a time period when all the land masses were in one supercontinent, Pangea. But a lot of people don't think about is the ocean that surrounds the rest of the world, and teeming with life. You can see examples of some of the stuff right here. These are the invertebrates, of course, but at also the time period there's a number of sharks and fish and stuff still around and what have you. They started in the Devonian, but they proliferated after that. And some of these were common in the Permian, but a lot of them did not survive. I mean, ammonites survived the Permian extinction, but died out in the Cretaceous. Nautiloids are still in existence. Crinoids, they're reduced by today. They used to be all over the place back at this time. Horn corals and tabulata corals, they went extinct in the Permian, and of course brachiopods, gastropods, they're still around. And of course trilobites, they went extinct during the Permian. So think about that, the whole ocean life, surrounding the time. I know it's not the most fascinating for everyone, but it's something to consider. Case in point, this mural here by Julius Satoni illustrates how diverse life was, and its own ecosystem in the Permian. And obviously in shallow waters, but we got some ammonites, we got some trilobites down here, coral, of course, crinoids. You got your sharks. In fact, look at here. Nice little display right here. Very interesting tooth arrangement of the shark. Just wonderful. Speaking of that shark, it's not actually a shark, it's a close relative. It's more of a ratfish, which like sharks are cartilaginous. But this is a fossil of the tooth rows that it possesses. And it's related to a shark, but it's more closer to ratfish and all that. But it's very interesting. Of course, around here you can find examples of the coral that exists in the Permian. Most of the time when you find not coral, or crinoid. Most of the time when you find crinoids, they would be broken in pieces. I find sections just outside my grandparents' home in Ponca City. And but if you find one like this, it's quite a find. Usually finds them when they die. Of course, your trilobites, prolific throughout the Paleozoic, and they die in the Permian. And the famous ammonites, which get into huge sizes. It'd be fascinating to see these in the wild. This right here illustrates the largest known arthropod ever known, the Euryptorians, also known as sea scorpions. And they can get up to over 8 feet tall. I'm 5'9", so man, that'd be intimidating to see. And of course you could stand, see how you are. You could take pictures of kids and see how big they are compared to how big these things are. Quite amazing. There's a nice little map of the Permian period at this time. Just one huge landmass, and you got all that ocean around it, the Panthalassa Ocean. And of course, in Permian, you still have your North America, Europe, and Siberia, Northern China, that's Laurasia. And then you got Gondwana, which are Africa, South America, and India, and Antarctica. But this is the world of the Permian. And down here, you see the geological time. Now, Permian is a small section right on this part, but you can see from beginning of the formation of the Earth to the first simple cells, prokaryotes, which are bacteria. You got all this time of life, mostly as single-cell organisms, pollen scum, you could probably think of it as. Then you got the Precambrian, for simple animals, that's around the Ediacara and all that. Then you got your famous time periods where most of us are familiar with: Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic. This is our time. This is the time of the dinosaurs, and when mammals officials showed up, then we have this switch divided up here. Here we got Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, which divides sometimes two areas depending on which side of the ocean you're on. And this is where this is what this exhibit goes through, this time period right here, right before the time of the dinosaurs. So, and even then, you still got the early, middle, and late. So despite the fact that this is still millions of years of time, it's a small amount compared to all of life on this planet. Okay, so here we are with another boring plaque here, but it's things like this you get your information from. So this talks about the first tetrapod predators. In the early Permian, you have tetrapods going all over the place, particularly amphibians in the early part. And of course, a tetrapod by itself is an animal with 4 limbs and a backbone. And amphibians were one of the earliest ones that came from that group. Despite the limitations that they still had to be in wet, moist areas in order to reproduce and all that, they still became quite diverse in all the adaptations that they could. Now, they didn't start off in the Permian. They started off about as early as the Devonian, but by the time the Permian came, they really went off in all sorts of directions in life. Of course, when you have plants, started to dominate the land masses in earlier time periods, and then insects went along with the plants. And of course, to the food web, that's where these guys come in. So that provides plenty of resources for them. Let's see some examples. So we have another wonderful mural by Julius Ottonier of the earlier vertebrate life in the early Permian, particularly around Europe. So let's see, I'm going to try and correlate this with the picture description here. This one large right here is Sclerocephalus, chasing a earlier shark here, the Acanthoides. Below that, this one right here, that is a Dicosauriscus. And let's see, this got a little guy right here, if I can pronounce it, Micromerlepetin. That's what this guy right here. And one of this guy here, that's Simoria. And what's this last one down here? Oh, yeah, this one right here, Epitian. Many of us are familiar with salamanders like that, so wonderful environment to look into. We've had the chance. Probably want to be careful with this guy. So here's an early amphibian of the Permian, Simoria, as I showed in a mural. And let's see if we can get a nice little look upon that. Fascinating zoning out. And of course, here's the description there. You can pause and read that if you wish. But in short, they thought this was a reptile in the 1940s. They presumed dry, scaly skin and all that. And some of the amphibians were adapted to not only be in the oceans, be semi-aquatic, but also be in dry land as well, like reptiles. The problem is they still had to go back to the water to reproduce. That's why they're still amphibians, because they haven't developed the amnion yet. But also on the other side, another guy right here. Some of you may think this is ugly or cute. This is a K-Cops. The description right here. So you can pause and read that. And these are found in mostly Texas and Oklahoma. I look at this guy and I think the character Woola from John Carter of Mars, only less legs. It may be creatures like this that may have inspired Edgar Rice Burroughs to create that. Let's see. And let's see. This too is an early reptile. Other group, Timnospondylae. which is an extinct group by today's standards, so they're no longer around. They have a very interesting set of backbones, which is where you get its name from. But it also this is a group that has like 5 digits on its limbs. Let's see if we get the other side here. All sorts of interesting things in this time period. Okay, here's an example of something that you would think is a crocodile. It was a semi-aquatic animal, but it wasn't a reptile. This is actually an amphibian. This is a Platyposaurus, and flat-faced. It's meaning flat-faced reptile, but this is actually from the rest of its shell structure, it shows that it's amphibian. But it shows an interesting convergence of lifestyle to where similar features would come through non-related species. Now, many of you may be familiar with this. I know I am, since childhood and through the museum. This is a Diplocalus. This is a different group of amphibians, the Leptospondylae, and many of us would think of remember this because it has an interesting head, and it may serve to help swim, hydrofoil. As some would say, at least from the description down here. Get a nice close up on that. Yeah, hydrofoil generating lift in the water, or been used to fend off predators. So yeah, I'm well familiar with this one. It's a nice reproduction here. These guys were all around the middle Permian, few surviving to the end, or the later Permian. Now here's an example of one of the top predators from the middle Permian here, and this is of a group called a basal of therapsids, a very basal one. Therapsids are a group of synapsids, which are known because here's the eye, and synapsids have one temporal fenestra on the skull. Allows attachment of muscles to help close the jaw. Now, the group that this is part of will later give rise to the mammals, later on. So, and of course, if you wonder why this is a dinosaur, dinosaurs will have 2 temporal fenestras, one below and one above. If you look at the holes behind that. But this one is, let's see, Titanosuccus, meaning ancient giant crocodile. It's also, as you can see, it's saber tooth. So yeah, cats weren't the only ones that developed large canines. You'll see later on other groups that developed that. But right next to it is another therapsid. This is Biarmosuccus tenor, crocodile from Biarmia. Sorry for that. Hopefully you all can read that. But let's go back to the fossil here, much more fascinating. This is another therapsid. Very interesting guy. Let's get a nice good look at that skull. And as you can see, there's another temporal fenestra, a very small one. They consider the smaller ones would indicate that they're basal, and it too has nice little large canines here. This is where things start to get interesting. Now, this is where a lot of you first start to get very familiar with the early life of the Permian. And I have to admit, when I first came to this exhibit, I didn't realize that these models right here would be animatronic to a degree. This right here is a Daphosaurus, which was a permanent exhibit in the Museum Ancient Life Hall. But here you got a nice little fleshed out area. This is a synapsid, which shows that it's more closely related to mammals, therefore us, it is to things like T-Rex, where we assumed it is. Here are a couple other reproductions here. This is Cotylercus, which is the first vertebrate fossil found in the Norman, Oklahoma area. Usually known for its very small head compared to its body size. And this one you probably are most familiar with here, the famous Dimetrodon. Famous for its large sail, top predator in the early Permian here. This plaque right here talks about particularly since early Permian and early Paleozoic are dominated by a lot of amphibians, but this talks about the special adaptation, the amniotic egg. The amnion is a part of in an egg that surrounds the embryo, keeping moisture inside. That allowed later animals to develop this to go outside of the water areas and moist areas, so they lay their eggs, so they go further inland. And this kind of shows up how, it talks about the earlier groups that had this. You got the synapsids. The earlier ones are like Dimetrodon and Daphosaurus and Cotylercus. And then you have further down therapsids, advanced groups within the synapsids, which includes Dinosaurs, Gorgonopsians, Dicinodonts, and Cyanodonts. But you also have the second group here of amniotes, which are reptiles, divided in two groups. You got the parareptiles right here, and also the diapsids, and that's the group that will later evolve to dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and all that. Let's see some examples. And this one animal is called the Scudasaurus. This is one of the parareptiles mentioned earlier. And herbivorous, found in Russia. No temporal fenestra. So it's not, so it's not a synapsid, nor is it diapsid either. So it's its own little group here. According to some researchers, that this thing was capable of hearing well, probably makes its own sounds. Herbivorous. He even found gastroliths, which are stones used for grinding. Let's take a look at all that. Before I show you this one, we're going to go to the plaque here. This is of an exhibit called Moschops, or Moscops, meaning cow face. This is a group of Dinosaurs, meaning terrible heads. They exist around the middle Permian, and didn't survive well to the late Permian. And I think an earlier plaque says Gorgonopsians sort of took over from there. They're known for having these larger sized heads, and well, let me show you. Here it is. Moscops. Herbivorous. Could possibly be semi-aquatic, similar like to hippos. Now, Dinosaurs, are known for having these terrible heads, but the herbivorous ones will have a smaller head relative to carnivorous ones, which is the same true of modern mammals today. Just interesting as all get out. Of course, there's a wonderful mural behind it. So as you approach the later Permian, you deal with the top predators of the time, and these are Gorgonopsids. And they range from size as dogs to about as large as, to canines and so forth. Here's an example of it. They're usually, they're therapsids, so they have one temporal fenestra in their skull, but and of course primitive ones will have smaller ones, like the example shown earlier. But the later ones will as they get bigger, they'll have larger temporal fenestras, give them a stronger bite, and of course the famous saber teeth that they're known of. So here's an example of Dinogorgon, terrible gorgon, as its name remains. This plaque right here. Don't know if you can get a great read on that, but this mentions that it's the world's earliest saber-toothed predator, found in South Africa, obviously carnivorous. Wonderful mural above that of them in action. Let's take a look at that. Here we talk about one of the larger Gorgonopsids, Titanophanius. Let's take a look at how big it got right here. Huge. But both its canines and these front insides, they're pretty good for grappling prey. This particular one is found in, these are found in Russia. Of course, a lot of good Permian, rocks for such things, you'll find them, in either South Africa or Russia.
few other places in the world, but that's where the main hotspots are. Give it a nice good back up here. How about that? It's not a dinosaur, but still fearsome. This is a pariasaur, also a group pair of reptiles there, Scudasaurus. And these are herbivorous animals. They're quite huge, and even have bony plates on their back. And because that, at least we found a fossil of this, so it was probably well armored, and you probably would be when you go up against something like this guy right here. This is probably the largest gorgonopsid that they've ever found, top predator of its time. And life's a constant struggle between those that can try and catch prey and those that try to prevent from being captured. In this case, it's armor to help give it a hand. And this thing is bigger than a saber-toothed tiger, according to the plaque. For those of you who are interested, I'll move around here. Yeah. Let's see right here. Inostrosevia. Top predator of its time. But quite a struggle there. I mean, the platform here is not that tall, it's about a little over a foot. So you're almost at ground level. These guys hate me in the middle of all this. And here's a skeleton of that gorgonopsid I just showed off here. So see the temple fenestra right here is much larger, so the muscles will be much more stronger. And you see you got the front teeth and the saber teeth, very good to try and capture and bite prey. But look how large it is. And this cute little guy here, this Dicinodont here. This is part of a group called Dicinodont, meaning two dog teeth. And interesting about it is that even though it has the teeth, it also has a beak as well. And these are, considered small herbivores, according to research. They're also known for having these burrows that could go up to 5 feet deep to help, for protection, help raise their young, and regulate body temperature. I know some of you would like to have this as a pet. Now while I go over some of the bigger predators and larger herbivores of the time, by the late Permian, Dicinodonts became the most prolific group of animals to exist throughout the late Permian. Some of them exist, and a lot of them survived after the Permian extinction. They're quite adaptive little buggers. Some of you might recognize this guy. This is a Dinosaurs, Stiminosuccus. And this is probably herbivorous, maybe omnivorous. I would say opportunistic if possible. Think of like these as giant cows or hippos with bony edges there that they might have used for display and maybe butting heads as deer do and rams and such. And here's the skull of a Stiminosuccus here. Now the name itself means crowned reptile, but these are Dinosaurs, therefore of a group of therapsids, which means it's closer related to mammals, although mammals derive from a different group. Yeah. And of course, how do you tell? Large temple fenestra here. We go back to that again. So crocodiles will have two because I think they're diapsids. Look at the headgear on that. So yeah, they say it's herbivorous based on the tooth and because of the large gut and all that. But the way, of course, some of these teeth are suggest that it could eat meat on occasion, so most likely be omnivorous. Get your nutrients where you can, kids. Here we have the front part of another dinosaur from the middle Permian, Euryptorians. So As I said earlier, Dinosaurs are herbivorous, tend to have larger, bonier heads than the carnivorous Dinosaurs. It's not a complete skeleton, but quite impressive of itself. Look at that. And of course, there's a plaque right here. So I'm going to close in on that for those who are interested. You take a look right here, this kind of illustrates the blue part is the bony head there, and this red part is where the brain is. Oh, and you're curious, yes, that's the famous Robert T. Bacher. Most of us are familiar with him. Here's a mural that illustrates the end of the Permian. Maybe not so dramatic or up front. You know, it's not impossible, but in some areas of the world. But this talk shows the Great Dying, and which is the largest extinction known throughout Earth's period. We usually think of mass extinctions like the asteroid that hit the Cretaceous Tertiary time period, which knocked out a lot of the non-avian dinosaurs and such. But this one's a little worse and a bit slower, as this plaque generally shows here. It talks about in what is now Siberia and an area of mountains called the Siberian Traps. They were formed by a huge volcanic eruption for a geological period of up to 80,000 years. Long time for us, short time for the geological sense. But in so doing, it causes huge series of chain reactions worldwide. The emissions cause acid rain, which destroys a lot of plant life, and that affects a lot of things in life, and so forth, and also raises the temperature by 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Long story short, about 80% of the ocean life died, and about 70% of the land animals died. Of course, while a vast majority of life at that time period died, not everything did. And one of the examples of those that proliferated way after that, survived extinction, no problem, to where there's so many of them afterwards, and that's Lystrosaurus here. I remember reading about these in Peter Ward's Gorgon and all that, and right after the strata where the Permian extinction happened, these guys were all over the place. The fossils were and hardly any other species around. So as everything died at this point, these guys proliferated all over. Here's a fleshed out example. Some would say kind of pig-like in a sense. But plaque of the skeleton here for those who don't want to see if I can. Hopefully you could read that. Of course, we have most of the Therapsids died except for this, a group called the Cyanodonts. And it's through these that you have modern reptiles show up in the Triassic period. And many of them already show traits. We know through some of the Cyanodonts, some species of Cyanodonts, they have traits on the skull that shows whiskers. Like this guy right here, Divinia. So, in order to show up new species there, a lot of them that's already established has to be wiped out. So a nice little picture by Julius Satonier. So that was Permian Monsters, an exhibit that's there at the San Bernardino Museum. It's a temporary exhibit, so you have until November 8th if you're in the Norman, Oklahoma area to plan a visit. If not, then it's a traveling exhibit, so it may show up in a museum near you. Until then, you got this video, and I got a couple book recommendations if you're interested in the Permian, particularly extinction. One is When Life Nearly Died, the Greatest Mass Extinction of All Time, by Michael J. Benton. This was published, I believe, in 2003, 2004, early 2000s. Let me take a look here. Yeah, 2003. And this strictly is the research that tells about all that they know of the Permian extinction and what they know about it, and where it all has happened, both in main areas. What they talk about is in Russia and in South Africa. Another one is Peter D. Ward's Gorgon. Now this one's a little shorter there, about 240 some odd pages, and this is a combination of just not only the research and how they, of all the stuff they found up that led to the discovery of the Permian mass extinction. It also talks about the lives of the paleontologists, what they had to go through in the Karoo Desert in South Africa, both highs and lows. It's very interesting to read. This was published in 2004. So with that said, hope you enjoyed all this. Thank you all for watching. Have a nice day.